Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today, we're looking at the top 10 horrifying shark attacks. Yes, sharks are horrifying killing machines. They've been on Earth for 450 million years, which is longer than trees have been around, and throughout that time, their species has been the apex predator. However, the good news is that while sharks can be dangerous to humans, most of the time they are not. The odds of being bitten are about 1 in 3.7 million, so you're actually more likely to be hit by lightning. However, just because they are rare doesn't mean they don't happen, and in the video today, we're looking at 10 of the most horrifying attacks. Number 10. Heather Boswell. In early 1994, 19-year-old Heather Boswell joined the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration (NOAA) to serve food to a crew on board an expedition in the South Pacific Ocean. On March 23, 1994, Boswell was swimming 300 miles east of Easter Island with 8 shipmates. Suddenly, someone yelled "shark." Everyone swam as fast as they could to the boat to get away from the 14-foot great white shark, but not everyone made it to safety unscathed. The first person the shark attacked was Phil Buffington. He was bitten on the leg. Next, the shark moved towards Boswell. As it got close, Boswell stopped moving because she was afraid of kicking the shark. When she stopped moving, the shark bit her right leg. Meanwhile, 3 crew members got on a raft to go help her. When they got to her, they tried to pass her a stick, and when she grabbed it, the shark bit her on the left leg and pulled her under the water. The shark shook her, but amazingly, it brought her back to the surface again, right near the raft. When she popped back up again, one crew member tried to hit the shark with a stick, while 2 other crew members pulled Boswell onto the raft, and when she was pulled aboard, she heard a pop. When she looked down, her leg was gone at mid-thigh. The shark went after a third person who was climbing a rope ladder out of the water onto the boat, but luckily they were not hurt. Buffington and Boswell were airlifted to the hospital and they both survived. Buffington received 50 stitches, while Boswell had to get a prosthetic leg. Number 9. Jessie Arbogast. On the 6th of July 2002, 8-year-old Jessie Arbogast was playing with his sister and cousins in shallow water in Pensacola, Florida. Vance and Diana Flozenzia, Jessie's aunt and uncle, were about to call the children in for dinner when one of them shouted "shark." Vance and Diana ran to the beach and saw a cloud of blood in the water. The shark had Jessie's right arm in its mouth and it was rolling. Finally, the arm came off and Diana, along with some bystanders, pulled Jessie from the water. Besides losing his arm, a big chunk of Jessie's right thigh was also missing. As a result, he was also nearly drained of blood and he had stopped breathing. Diana and other bystanders performed CPR on the boy for 10 minutes. Meanwhile, Vance grabbed the shark, which was a 7-foot bull shark, by the tail and dragged it ashore. A park ranger shot the shark and the arm was pulled from the shark's mouth. Jessie was taken to a hospital, but he slipped into a coma. His arm was reattached and his leg was mended and he came out of the coma. Unfortunately, due to the coma, Jessie is confined to a wheelchair and can no longer speak. Number 8. Seyne Disaster. At 4 in the morning on November 4th, 1909, the French liner La Seyne collided with the British liner Onda about 26 miles from Singapore. The collision split the La Seyne in half and it sank in 2 minutes. Since most people on board were in bed at the time of the crash and the boat sank so quickly, 101 people sank with the ship. 61 people managed to get off the boat and the Onda lowered 3 life rafts into the water. The survivors had a problem getting into the lifeboats because it was not only dark and foggy, which is why the boats crashed, but sharks were also attacking many of the survivors. When people were pulled from the water, some had injuries from the sharks, and in some cases they were severe. However, it does not appear that the sharks were responsible for any deaths. Number 7. Rodney Temple. On October 14th, 1972, Rodney Temple, Brett Gilliam, and Robbie McIlvaine were divers on a scientific expedition off the coast of St. Croix. This is an island in the US Virgin Islands. On that day, they were taking pictures at a depth of 210 feet underwater. During their dive, Temple saw 2 white-tip sharks. Both of them were 12 feet long. On the way to the surface, the divers needed to stop along the way to decompress. The last man up should have been Temple. However, when a large air bubble rose through the water from underneath them, Gilliam and McIlvaine knew something was wrong. Gilliam swam down to help, while McIlvaine, who was running out of oxygen, went to the surface. When Gilliam reached Temple, one of the sharks had bitten him on the thigh and the second one bit him on the calf. Gilliam and Temple punched the sharks and then they let go, but only briefly. The sharks latched back onto Temple and dragged him down. Gilliam held onto Temple and he was dragged down as well. Eventually, they got to about 400 feet below the surface and Gilliam had run out of oxygen. He had no other choice but to let Temple go and swim towards the surface. Miraculously, he made it without drowning. He did suffer decompression sickness though, and then spent 2 days in the hospital. Unfortunately, Temple's body has never been recovered. Number 6. Tamara McAllister and Roy Jeffrey Stoddard. On the 26th of January 1989, 24-year-olds Roy Jeffrey Stoddard and his girlfriend Tamara McAllister set out from Malibu, California on what should have been a short kayaking trip. However, when they didn't return later that day, a search was launched. The day after they went missing, their kayaks were found tied together. This is a common practice for kayakers who were resting. However, in one of the kayaks there were 3 large holes, which the authorities said was caused by a great white shark. The next day, McAllister's body was found floating in the water. Parts of her legs and buttocks were missing. Stoddard's body has never been found, and it's assumed that he died after being attacked by the shark, and his body drifted north with the current. Number 5. Elio Canestri. Reunion Island is a French island east of Madagascar in the Indian Ocean. Its beaches are well-known surfing areas, and between 2011 and 2015 there were 16 shark attacks there. 7 of them were fatal. When the attacks started happening, the government set up spotters on the beach to watch for the sharks. In fact, there was actually a ban against going into the water without spotters. Well, that's what makes the story of Elio Canestri so tragic. In 2015, Elio was 13 years old and one of the up-and-coming stars of the Reunion surfing scene. On April the 13th, 2015, Elio left the following note for his mother: "Don't worry, Mum, I'm going surfing. If there's no security, I won't surf." Tragically, Elio didn't do what he said in his note, and he and 6 other people went surfing without a spotter. As Elio went to mount a wave about 50 feet from the shore, a shark bit him in the stomach and then flung him around. Finally, the shark started to pull him out to sea. A boat was launched and Elio's body was retrieved, but he died later in hospital. Number 4. The crew of the H.M.S. Birkenhead. In January 1852, the H.M.S. Birkenhead left Portsmouth, England, with the final destination being Australia. After a stop near Cape Town, South Africa on February the 25th, the ship struck a barely visible rock. On board were 614 men, 7 women, and 13 children. Many of the men were soldiers on their way to fight in the frontier wars. The rock ripped a hole in the hull of the boat, and it took on water quickly, drowning hundreds of men within the first few minutes. The lifeboats were lowered, but there weren't many of them. The crew decided that women and children should be the ones to use the lifeboats. This was the first time the rule "women and children first" was used, and the Birkenhead drill, as it is now called, has become part of naval tradition. The area was called Shark Alley because great white sharks congregated there with 2 food sources nearby. All of the commotion and blood in the water attracted the attention of the great whites, and they started to feast on the survivors. While it is impossible to figure out the exact number of people who were killed by the sharks, eyewitnesses who survived said that many people were killed by great whites as they waited for help. Of the 634 people on board, only 193 were saved, and this included the 7 women and 13 children. Number 3. Black December. The southern province of the KwaZulu-Natal province in South Africa is a holiday hotspot, and starting in 1957, it was the home to a series of terrifying shark attacks. The first attack was on December the 18th, 1957, when a 16-year-old body surfer lost his leg but survived. This was followed by 2 fatal attacks. A 15-year-old boy was killed 2 days after the first attack, and then 3 days later, a 23-year-old man was killed. The next victim was a 20-year-old man who was bitten on the head and neck while he was skin diving on December the 26th. The 5th victim was a 14-year-old girl who was attacked just 4 days later. Luckily, both survived. The next 4 victims, though, they wouldn't be so lucky. They were all killed as a result of their injuries. The string of shark attacks called Black December came to an end in April of 1958. In total, 9 people were attacked and 6 people died. The shark attacks scared away many of the tourists, making the once thriving coastal towns virtual ghost towns. To make the beaches safer and lure tourists back, shark nets were placed in 38 different spots along the coast. They catch 1,245 sharks per year. The sharks are released a short time later, and the nets have reduced shark attacks by 90%. Number 2. The 1916 shark attacks. On the night of July 1st, 1916, 25-year-old Charles Vansant was swimming on a beach in the resort town of Beach Haven, Pennsylvania. It was here that he was attacked by a great white shark. An incredibly brave lifeguard swam out to save Vansant and pulled him ashore. Vansant ended up bleeding to death a short time later on the desk at a nearby hotel. 5 days later, there was another shark attack. It happened 45 miles north of Beach Haven in Spring Lake, New Jersey. 27-year-old Charles Bruder was bitten in the abdomen and his legs were bitten off. He bled to death on the shore. Then the shark did something rather unusual. He moved to Matawan Creek near Keyport, New Jersey, which is 30 miles away from Spring Lake. I mean, after all, who intentionally moves to New Jersey? Just kidding there, it's actually the creek thing that was unusual. A captain saw the shark in the creek, but the townspeople dismissed his claims. On July the 12th, a group of boys came running down Main Street street screaming that there was a shark in the creek and it had attacked 11-year-old Lester Stillwell. The townspeople didn't believe their story and thought that Lester, who had epilepsy, had a seizure and had drowned. This led to people going into the creek to search for him. His body was found, and as it was being brought ashore by 25-year-old Watson Stanley Fisher, Fisher was attacked by the great white while the horrified townspeople watched on. He bled to death later in the hospital. The final victim was the only one to survive. Half an hour after Fisher was attacked, 14-year-old Joseph Dunn was bitten on the right leg. Luckily, his mother and brother were able to pull him to safety, and he made a full recovery. After killing 4 people and injuring a 5th, all in the span of 2 weeks, people along the East Coast were panicked. President Woodrow Wilson even heard about it and called a cabinet meeting. They ordered that money should be used to drive away all the ferocious man-eating sharks which have been making prey of bathers. 2 men found the shark a few miles away from the creek in Raritan Bay. It was a 7.5-foot-long male juvenile shark. After the shark nearly sank the boat, they were able to kill it with a broken oar. When they cut open the shark's stomach, they found the human remains. Amazingly, before these attacks, scientists didn't think that sharks attacked people. Of course, there were stories of sharks attacking people, including the other attacks on this list, but scientists merely wrote them off as fishermen's tales. The 1916 shark attacks forever changed that view, and of course, we now know that sharks will bite humans. Also, the story of a shark attacking people off the coast of New Jersey may sound familiar to the many people who've seen the movie Jaws. The attacks are often credited with inspiring the novel and the film. However, Peter Benchley, who wrote the novel, says that Jaws wasn't inspired by the shark attacks of 1916. He just happened to write a book about a series of shark attacks in New Jersey that led to a shark hunt that nearly sunk the boat of the hunters. Quite a coincidence, Number 1. The crew of the USS Indianapolis. And speaking of Jaws, in the summer of 1945, the USS Indianapolis was on a secret mission to drop off parts at an army base on the island of Tinian in the Pacific Ocean. The parts were then used to construct the Little Boy nuclear bomb, which was dropped on Japan on August 6, 1945. After dropping off the parts, the heavy cruiser and its 1,200 sailors were heading to Leyte, which is an island in the Philippines. However, they would never make it to their destination because just after midnight on July 30th, 1945, a Japanese submarine fired 6 torpedoes at the cruiser, and 2 of them hit the ship. It caused the USS Indianapolis to sink in 12 minutes, with at least 3,000 men dying before getting off the ship. The problem was that the ship sank so fast that the crew was unable to send off a distress signal. Also, the port where they were heading didn't record boats coming in, so the Navy didn't know that the USS Indianapolis hadn't docked. Meanwhile, some 900 men were forced into the water. There weren't many lifeboats, so instead the men were forced to wear life preservers and float. Unfortunately, the loud explosions of the ship sinking and all the blood in the water caught the attention of sharks. On the first day, the sharks just ate the dead. However, they soon turned their attention to people who were wounded. This led to injured men or men with open wounds being quarantined. Besides the sharks, another problem was food. Not many rations were pulled from the ship before it sank. Even when they did have rations, they couldn't eat it. For example, when one group of men opened a can of Spam, sharks encircled them, so the men chose not to eat any meat rations. Over the next several days, the men floated in the shark-infested waters and baked under the sun. This led to further deaths, and it caused hallucinations, which caused the men to drink the salt water, leading to death by salt poisoning. Finally, 4 days after their ship went down, a Navy pilot saw the men and radioed for help. Hours later, when a seaplane dropped supplies and rafts, the pilot saw that the sharks were still attacking the men. So, against orders, he landed the plane and got most injured people on board and flew them to safety. The remaining survivors were rescued just after midnight on August 3rd, after 5 days at sea. Out of the 900 men who made it into the water, only 317 survived. It is America's biggest naval disaster, and it is also considered the worst shark attack in history. It's believed that between 12 and 150 men were killed by sharks. So I won't ask whether you enjoyed that video, but I do hope you found it interesting and informative. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and don't forget to subscribe for brand new videos just like this every day of the week. And hey, if you're looking for something else to watch, please do check out some of our other videos which are on the screen to the right of me right now. And as always, thank you for watching.